Hi, everybody. I'm Andy Reynolds, COO, financial advisor at Ballast, and we are as excited as we continue to talk about charitable planning to have the CEO of the Bluegrass Community Foundation, Lisa Adkins, with us today. I have had the pleasure of being around Lisa probably for 10 years now, maybe longer, as a board member, as a investment committee chair, as a chair of the golf scramble, and also as a fund holder at the Community Foundation. So, Lisa, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Andy, so happy to be here and have this conversation with you and your clients.
Absolutely. So, one thing I asked Lisa to start us off with is just talk a little bit about the trends that she's seeing within the philanthropic and charitable planning areas. And as you do that, feel free to tell us about a little bit about the Community Foundation as well and whatnot. But we just want to talk today about high level, low level. We'll go through a lot of things, but just kicking us off, what are you seeing today in charitable planning, and how is the Community Foundation able to help charitably inclined people fulfill some of those goals and maybe some unique things that you're seeing as well?
Happy to share a bit of insight. I think in terms of the trends that I'm seeing in charitable giving is that donor advised charitable funds have never been more popular. Uh, those are just a great vehicle for anyone, but for your clients who want to really simplify their charitable giving. I'm sure it's something I know that you have conversations about, but a donor advised charitable fund essentially is a charitable giving account. It is the most popular type of charitable fund we offer at the Community Foundation. And so there is no minimum to get started. And so I myself have a donor advised charitable fund. I know, Andy, you have one, but essentially I and my family, we put money in. We get a charitable tax deduction every time we do that on the date that contribution is made. And then we can make grants from that fund, grant recommendations. The Community Foundation handles all of the back end, all the administration, make sure that that charitable tax deduction gets out to the donor. We make sure that the grants get out to the grant recipients. And we just make it super simple. Within that donor advised charitable fund vehicle, what we're also seeing as a real trend is that folks are making a larger charitable contribution, usually with some kind of appreciated asset, like let's say appreciated stock, and they're timing that for their taxes. So they're donating that larger contribution at the most opportune time for them tax wise. And then it's called bunching. So they make one contribution, but they may be actually donating 3 or 5 years worth of charitable giving dollars. And there can be real tax advantages to that. So those are two things that we're seeing in terms of donor advised charitable funds, and it is so quick and easy to get started with that. The other thing that we're seeing, I would say is a significant trend, is the number of people that are partnering with their local community foundation for charitable legacy planning. It has been an unbelievable year for us in terms of the number of individuals and couples and families we've helped with their charitable legacy planning. In that case, Andy, we are not replacing their investment advisor. We're not replacing their estate attorney or their CPA. In fact, whether it could be a simple matter, it could be very complex. We might be working with all of their advisors as a team, but we are helping ultimately get them with a charitable legacy fund agreement. We are then sometime in the future going to steward that gift after their lifetime. And right now, I would say we have probably more than $280 million in future charitable legacy expectancies. That means those are the anticipated dollars that will flow into various legacy charitable funds here after a donor or after the last lifetime of a donor couple's estate plan comes into being. All I will say is these can be really as simple or as complex as needed. They can be very creative and personalized. So if an individual or a couple or a family has a real charitable aspiration, a charitable dream that they want to make happen after their lifetimes, we can help them with that as well as with their current charitable giving. But I will just say that has been something that's been keeping us very, very busy. And I think charitable legacy planning and just making sure that anyone has a great estate plan in place is so central. Community foundations, a Bluegrass Community Foundation, can really simplify the charitable part of that legacy.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. I want to touch on two quick things there. You mentioned the donor advised funds. So I believe our office is currently setting up two new ones with the Community Foundation for clients using Micron stock. So we invest in Micron for some of our clients. So our stock portfolio has done really well. It's had a really good performance over the past couple months, quarters. And we're using that bunching strategy for people who are charitably inclined, and we're saying, hey, this stock's done really well. We've had some outsized gains. Let's take a little bit of money off the top and let's put that into a donor advised fund where, it can be invested in cash, it could be invested in investments for a more longer term period, and then allow them to make donations out of that. So from a practical standpoint, it's something that we're getting a lot of questions about as well. And largely, we see the biggest benefit around the bunching, where you have, one single opportunity where we have this big tax year or this big tax gain or some dealing with taxes, and we can put a little business sale or whatnot, and you can put some assets into a charitable goal to offset some of that tax, and then utilize them in future years, which is really beneficial. Another area you mentioned was the estate planning side, and you are an attorney, obviously, but one thing that we've noticed with people, and I noticed this with my wife when we did our estate plan, is for people who do it every day, attorneys or advisors like us, or you're involved in estate planning conversations all the time, it becomes kind of less emotional. But when you go through it maybe for the first time or the second time and you don't do it very often in your life, sometimes making those concrete choices of, hey, if I pass, which is an emotional thought process, where do I want my money to go? And what I really like about utilizing a community foundation like you all for that is I may not be sure where I want them to go, but I know I want to get my estate plan done. So we can set up a fund through you all and name, hey, 10%, 25%, whatever percent of my estate goes to this fund. And then that fund can be changed where the charities are can be changed through you all. So talk a little bit, just real quickly, a bit of a tangent on what that process looks like. If I have the Andy Reynolds fund or Andy and Laura Reynolds fund, my estate goes there, and I really like, XYZ charity, but maybe over 5 years from now, I start working with another charity and I want to change it or add them. How does that work within your all system?
Yeah, I think Andy, you were mentioning one of the biggest benefits of working with Bluegrass Community Foundation, and that is how we really simplify the administration of a charitable legacy plan and even the administrative burdens and costs over one's lifetime. And so, to give you a little bit of detail, um, people who put all of the fine detail about what they want to do with their charitable money into their will, their actual will or trust. What happens then, and we see this all the time, you may set that up when you're 40 or 50 or 60, but even as you head into retirement, let alone before, your charitable passions may change. And even if they don't change, you may add to them. And so you set up your will or your trust with these very specific charities with perhaps very specific percentages or dollar amounts you want to leave them after your lifetime. But that changes, and that can change multiple times over your lifetime, as well as that of your partner if you have one. And so, what is so great about working in partnership with a community foundation, if you and Laura instead, and I know you've done this, if you were to say, we want whatever our estate is after our lifetimes, we want 10% to go to the Andy and Laura Reynolds Fund at Bluegrass Community Foundation. I'm done. That is the language that is in my will or my trust or both. And then what happens? We have a separate charitable fund agreement that you all can set up now, which you would do. But if you change your mind about your charitable beneficiaries, if you want to add one or six, or if you want to delete something, or you want to change the percentages, you can do that with us with a simple fund amendment. And we do that completely free of charge because we're a nonprofit meant to make charitable giving and generosity as easy and simple and widely available as possible. In contrast, if instead you had that kind of detail in your will or your trust, every time you wanted to make a change, you'd have to do an amendment or a codicil, and you'd have to, of course, pay your professional advisor to update that. And I will tell you, we have seen like predecessor wills and trusts before they may have gotten here, where there may be 10 amendments over the decades of someone's lifetime, or 10 codicils, because they have in fact changed their mind as their involvement or their interests or their passions have changed. So I will say it really does reduce the administrative burden. It absolutely reduces the expense, and it lets your charitable legacy fund agreement at the community foundation really be flexible so that it can be changed. The other thing I will say is, and many people do name specific organizations and they want a particular percentage to go to them, but you can actually be so much more creative, and the community foundation is here to help. So it is very common in our charitable legacy fund agreements here that people do name particular charities, but sometimes folks have particular areas of passion. That's what we would call a field of interest. So what they will, and they can make that a geographic interest, they can make that a focus area of interest, or both. So an example would be, we have a fund here that a lovely couple set up. They have now both passed, and their charitable legacy resides here at the Community Foundation. They cared about two things deeply. They cared about environmental causes across the state of Kentucky, and they also cared deeply about people in poverty in Appalachia. They didn't know after their lifetime, and they both passed well into their 80s. They weren't sure next year or 10 years from now or 50 years from now what organizations and what projects would be the most compelling things. And so they gave us very specific geographic parameters. They gave us very specific interest parameters, but then the Community Foundation is here to stand in their shoes and to make sure that that charitable money goes out every year forever, but exactly supporting the kinds of causes that they were interested in. And so that is another option. And that is just one option. We often have, charitable legacy fund agreements that have multiple options all contained within a document. So people name some specific organizations, they name some fields of interest. Maybe they're interested in other things like scholarships, or frankly, even supporting their home community. This can be very personalized. It can be very creative. And we are here to provide that kind of guidance and insight and support. And we do it completely free of charge because we are a nonprofit, and that is our charitable mission. So as I said, we don't replace someone's estate attorney or financial advisor or CPA. And we understand that those kinds of professionals are not nonprofits and they need to charge for their services, but we'll work right alongside them on behalf of what are now our mutual clients. And we do not charge for our services to provide this kind of assistance to get these agreements exactly as they'd like them.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And we always share that with our clients is, you guys are a tool that we can involve in their plan to where you guys can help provide another set of eyes, another piece of guidance, another piece of information, where it's a useful addition to the broader plan. And with that, the benefit of community foundations, not just your alls, but across the country, is most are staffed by very intelligent, qualified people. I mean, you guys have CPAs, you have attorneys on staff, so definitely a valuable asset. Staying kind of in that regard, so we work with a lot of business owners, and obviously for many people, their business is their biggest asset. Sometimes they're saving alongside of it, sometimes they're not saving at all alongside of it, but they may have charitable desires that may align with the time in which they're selling their business. As you're working with business owners, what are you guys thinking about when it comes towards that exit from the business, and what opportunities are you seeing for business owners who are charitably inclined to align their goals with also knowing that there may be a tax year where it's pretty large because they're selling their business?
Well, Andy, I think you've just actually sort of given information that answers kind of a very common misconception about charitable giving, and that is, I think many people think if I'm going to give charitably, I'm going to do that with a check, or I'm going to put that donation on a credit card. But the great thing about thinking really strategically about charitable giving is there's so many different kinds of assets that can actually help one realize their charitable aspirations. And a business as an asset is just one of them. And community foundations can work with all of them. And maybe we should get into that in a minute, all the different kinds of assets that people can use during their lifetime and after to really fulfill their charitable passion. But to your specific question about businesses, again, there are very creative solutions. And so we have had scenarios here, and it, obviously, as you pointed out, it goes hand in hand with smart, savvy tax planning. But a portion of the business is donated to the community foundation. And again, this is all highly coordinated. You want to bring, just like are going to bring your financial advisor and your CPA and your attorney in really early, you're going to bring us in early so we can make sure it all counts and that everything follows the protocol and the steps. But there is absolutely a way to do that where even though you're selling that business, let's say, to a single purchaser or a single purchaser group, we can all work together in a legal way to make sure that even though you're maybe donating, let's say 10% or 30% of that business asset to the community foundation, there is a way to make sure that that all coordinates into the ultimate appropriate maximize sale of that business. And again, one would get a charitable donation for that percentage of the business that's donated. And that both creates charitable dollars right now or a charitable legacy in the future, of course, depending on the size, but it can also make a huge difference in offsetting the gains from the sale of that business. So actually a business donation is, one way to do that. Sometimes there are businesses that own real estate or buildings or land. And so we have seen where there is a business sale and maybe that business is sold 100% to a particular buyer, but it may be that a physical asset, such as a building or land, is donated to the community foundation. Again, there are timing considerations and legal protocol that has to be followed, but we all work together to make sure that timing and the steps happen. And so, as I said, they are passing on that business. Maybe it's about multi-generational transition of a business, but there still can be a charitable component through a real estate asset, whether it's a physical building or the underlying land, that sort of thing. And that can create the charitable legacy and can also provide that, the offset to the taxable gain. So there's a number of different strategies that can be deployed. It's all about bringing the community foundation in early. And to your point, I'm one of 3 attorneys on staff. We have 2 CPAs. We have other folks with accounting degrees. And so we do have an expert team here. And we also bring in outside expert professionals if needed, depending on the complexity of the case. But there really is nothing too complex in this arena that a community foundation cannot be a part of to help a person or a family create a charitable legacy in conjunction with the sale of their business.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. One thing as I was thinking about that as you were talking, a lot of business owners and people who've accumulated, even those who maybe have less charitable dollars to give, getting away from some of the tools and techniques side, it also creates a value-based system. And so when we think about family governance or we think about working with multiple generations, there's a benefit to having, grandma and grandpa, mom and dad, children, grandchildren in those conversations. and spreading values. Sometimes if you look at the studies of money, and by the time it gets to the third generation, how much of a family business, it just as an example, is lost or spent. And so, can you share any stories or examples of situations where you've worked with families and the goal has been part of these tools to utilize them to not just make good tax decisions, but also to show good family values and to pass on those values to the next generation?
Well, I think there's two things in what you said there, Andy. And the first thing is you talked about people who may have more assets or less assets, but still have strong charitable values. And I think that's another beautiful thing about Bluegrass Community Foundation and really any community foundation. We work with donors of all sizes. I think it's a common misconception that if I'm not super wealthy, then charitable giving is not for me or I'm not a philanthropist. And so I just want to start by saying that at the Community Foundation, our philosophy, all giving is good, and you give at a level that is meaningful for you and for your family, and that varies widely. So just want to be clear that we work with givers of all sizes. And again, as I mentioned, just to set up a donor advised charitable fund, there is no minimum. And I'll tell you in terms of charitable legacies, since we're talking about that, we work with donors that the charitable legacy is going to be $10,000, and I'll tell you increasingly, we are working with more donors where that charitable legacy is 10 million, 30 million, 50 million or more. So there really is no size that's too large, but our view is also there's really no size that is too small, that it all adds up to making for, a stronger community. So I did want to make that point. But in terms of the value of involving multiple generations, the Community Foundation and using, we have many different kinds of charitable funds. And so again, that all, what kind of fund you have is all dictated by what you're trying to achieve. The point is they're great for instilling values and using across multiple generations. So it is very common that a charitable fund for lifetime use is set up here. And then there is always a succession plan to every charitable fund. So it could be that, using myself as an example, after my lifetime and my husband's, there very likely could be a balance in our charitable fund. And we can set that up so that our daughter is a successor advisor. She has no children today, but we can also specify that her children could follow in her footsteps. And that is very, very common here. And there's, again, different ways that can be personalized about how that follows on, but I will just tell you that's incredibly common here. And when I have that current use charitable fund here, again, it's very common that folks decide they're going to use that fund and they're going to, after their lifetime, have additional estate assets pour into it to form a permanent charitable legacy. And again, children to grandchildren to great grandchildren, they could advise on that fund. So some folks just do that through their charitable legacy. They're not doing it during their lifetime. But to your point about how to share values and instill values, a lot of folks choose to get a charitable fund and start using it now, and they involve their children and then their grandchildren into that decision making. And we see that play out in a lot of great and creative ways. We have a family that, at Christmas, during the Christmas family gathering, they all get together and they do joint decision making on a certain portion of that fund. We got stories of families that do that around the Thanksgiving dinner table, and they all have assignments in advance. Everyone gets to bring and present and talk about, what they would like to give this year with their amount or their percentage of that fund. So we see it play out differently. Some families convene quarterly and have discussions about it. Others decide to do it once a year. I mean, we really can help families structure it the way that's most meaningful to them and that's appropriate for the size of the fund that they have. And then on the other hand, I could have my fund set up and I could simply make my child, in my case, aware of it and really let her know about the grants I'm making. And maybe I don't want to engage her for 20 years in that, or she simply knows she's going to be the successor advisor and after my lifetime, and then it's going to be hers. And in terms of really specific values alignment, this is where we can really help people put their mind at ease. So I'm going to give you a great example. We have a family. The couple is older. They have children, adult children, and grandchildren. And in this case, it's going to be a not insignificant legacy charitable fund that will remain after their lifetimes. So they have a fund now. Additional estate assets will pour in after their lifetimes. But to this particular couple, not all, but a significant portion of their charitable giving is very faith aligned. And then while they themselves are animal lovers, they just happen to, and let me just say, we have many, many funds here dedicated to animals, and there's a great need. So, no, not dissing the animal lovers. And I would say these folks are, but their own personal philosophy is there's lots of animal giving going on, and lots of, plenty of people supporting animals. So basically, they are giving very broad latitude to their children and their grandchildren, except for two things in their fund here. One is, sure, support animal charities, but do that on your dime. With this charitable fund, no grants to animal organizations. And then number two, because of their particular faith, um, their particular take on their faith, there are actually two nonprofits that their children and grandchildren can never give money to. And, no judgment. I mean, it's their money. And besides those three things, their children and grandchildren can distribute that money however they choose. But one of those, two of those, was just very important that it be in aligned with their faith. So they just didn't want their money, even 50 years from now, supporting that. And they just felt there were plenty of animal charities. They were more focused on helping people. And we can do that. It is, it is their money, it is their values, and that's how they want to help their children and their grandchildren remain in alignment with their views on that. And they've been very forthcoming, and the children and the grandchildren know. And we were happy to craft a fund agreement that has those stipulations. And we have the fiduciary and the ethical and the moral responsibility to make sure that the compliance happens. And that's what we do here.
No, and I think that's to the broader point, a good thing to touch on and just comment is with using a community foundation. Also, there's a lot of flexibility and there's a lot of creativity of what you can do. I always tell our clients if it's charitable, and I mimic this off of what you say, if it's charitable and legal, then you
You
guys
do
can do
it.
it. And we had a I don't think the person took me up on this, but I know we had a person who was actively involved in Doctors Beyond Borders and or Without Borders. And they had this one little town in Africa that they're very excited about. And I was like, I don't quite know how that could be done, but I think it could be. And I know somebody. So yeah, I think kudos to community foundations for that. So just and not to go too much longer because we appreciate everybody listening so long, but you know, a lot of the tools, techniques, whether it's a big institution or whether it's a local community foundation, Bluegrass Community Foundation or community foundation, different state, different community, the tools and techniques and to some degree the staff and credentials exist in a lot of those. So let's just say those things are similar, which they may be similar, maybe a little bit different. But what I've always enjoyed about the community foundation is the local touch. The money, there are fees associated with any charitable giving like that. That's just whether it's Charles Schwab, Fidelity, or whether it's the Community Foundation, there are fees associated. But what I've always liked about the Community Foundation is that those fees largely are going back into the community. So just real quickly, and feel free to share stories of other community foundations as well. But you had time outside of Lexington and came here to really grow our community foundation and what it is. But what are some local impacts and regional impacts that you've seen from a community foundation to where you guys, one, are getting involved in community events or community outreach and needs? I think back to COVID, you guys were really involved here locally, and then flood victims you guys were involved with. But What are you seeing that really differentiates you all? Just we can go back and forth on credentialing and all that, but really the local side of a local community foundation. What are you seeing as you talk to other CEOs and what you guys have done locally as well?
Well, you know, there are, I think now more than 900 community foundations across the United States. There are more in Canada and across the globe. But I do think you pointed out two really important things, and that is you cannot beat a community foundation for that personal, localized knowledge and service. And I can talk a bit more about that. Um, and in addition to that, in addition to the service, it is what happens to our fee. Which, as you said, there are many, many commercial donor advised fund providers. You named a few of them. There are probably a dozen more and probably new ones every day. But what I will say, in the case of Bluegrass Community Foundation, we were founded in 1967. That makes us the oldest community foundation in Kentucky. The field as a whole is more than 110 years old. And to your point about credentialing, we are a nationally certified community foundation. That is an extremely rigorous process. We are recertified every 5 years. So I put our professionalism and expertise up against anyone, community foundation or a commercial provider. And what I will say is, you are never going to call a 1-800 number or get a chatbot online. There are no AI agents at community foundations. Our primary office is right here in Lexington, Kentucky. We currently have a staff of 17. So if you email us, if you call us, if you stop by, there is going to be it's going to be a neighbor that is here. And of course, we serve across the bluegrass and a large swath of Appalachia, Kentucky. And so in addition to that personalized, expertise, there are 800 nonprofits alone just in Fayette County. And there are obviously many, many more outside of our service area and tens of thousands across the United States. And so not only do we have deep local, regional, and statewide expertise, and we are here to help our fund holders and our donors so that, again, some people, they know exactly what and where they want to give, and we just make that simpler and more efficient and usually more tax effective. But sometimes folks have a passion and they don't know the best literacy organization that's serving Bath County, or they don't know how to make the most environmental impact in Appalachia, or they don't know what is, the best youth sports organization in Lexington that is serving kids that otherwise couldn't afford to play this particular sport. That is something that we will know. And if we don't know, we have the expertise and the networks to find out. And that is, again, part of the service. It's just provided. We don't charge any additional for that service. We're just here to serve. And then on the other side of that, we do charge a fee on our charitable funds, just like those commercial providers do. But all of that is reinvested into our staff. It's reinvested back into our community. And just a few examples. Some of the folks who are listening to this, they may be familiar with the Good Giving Challenge, which for the last couple of years we've called Bluegrass Gives. But we have now done that for, I think we're coming up maybe on our 17th or 18th year of that.
Wow.
We have raised tens of millions of dollars for hundreds of local and regional nonprofits. And we do not take a penny of that. And my point is, no matter how lovely maybe a commercial provider is, they're not doing that for Lexington and for the region and for the nonprofits we serve across the bluegrass and Appalachia. A story, one great example that folks may not know is that for folks that are in and around Lexington and the bluegrass, they probably are familiar and hopefully have visited Gatton Park on the town branch. Well, that is a 501c3 nonprofit park conservancy. What they may not know is that project was incubated here at the Community Foundation for 5 years when it was a more nascent idea. And it was here, and then it ultimately got the maturity and got the staff and got its 501c3 federal nonprofit status. And so ultimately it morphed and rolled out of the Community Foundation. But for the first 5 years, it was housed here. And we actually do that probably at any one time for maybe up to 50 projects or nascent nonprofits a year. It is part of the service we provide to our community. And then those projects end or they, roll out into be their own nonprofit. But it's that kind of service that we provide that's really unique. That again, you're not going to see a commercial donor advised fund provider do. And they're simply not going to have the expertise about what's going on in our community, in our region, in our state. And that's what we're here to do. So those are just a few examples of when you pay your fee on your charitable fund here, what that unleashes.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful, and so much more. I think a community foundation, to your point, they are involved in the community. They know the needs. They're creating the opportunities for donors to also fulfill their desires. A lot of the time, I think meeting with clients and talking with clients, they don't quite know what they want or how they want it. And I think you help bring opportunities to the table for philanthropic people to have the opportunity to support something. Whereas otherwise, paralysis by analysis, yeah, they want to be generous, but taking that first step, I think sometimes is incredibly difficult for people, even when it's generosity based. So I do kudos, and that's one of the reasons I have, and we have been so supportive of Bluegrass Community Foundation and community foundations across the country. One thing, and just as we wrap up, and I'm gonna ask you a tough question. One thing I'd be remiss not to talk about also for all, we have clients across country, but in Kentucky, it is in Dow, Kentucky, tax credit season. So, another thing that a local community foundation does to help get tax credits for charitable gifts to an endowment at a community foundation. So, there's so many opportunities to where if you are charitably inclined, we've always felt like it just makes sense to communicate with the community foundation and us to help with those planning needs. And we've been talking for 35 minutes. We could go on for hours and hours about all the different opportunities and benefits and tools. And that's something that we just kind of want to keep it to the most popular and high level topics today. But my last question for you, Lisa. How long have you been at the community foundation?
It will be 17 years come October 1.
17 years, and when you came here, it was 25 million, and now it's
9 million. And now we're just $29 million in total assets. And now we are at just a hair under $350 million in total assets. But the biggest deal of all is since Bluegrass started, we now have put just about $230 million in grants back out into the community. And I want to say 90+% of that has stayed local and within the boundaries of Kentucky. Although folks can give around the United States and beyond, there really is that affinity to give back locally. I think we encourage that. And so that's what I think we're most proud about is just creating more generosity and getting more charitable dollars back to the causes that folks care about most.
no, I agree, and thank you for pointing out that too, because I remember the $100 million sign. That was
I'll
pretty
tell you
neat.
what,
You
we
far
turned
surpassed that.
yeah, no, we turn 60 years old next year, and we expect sometime in the spring to hit that $250 million mark in total grants out to the
It's
community.
great.
So there'll be another celebration.
Yes, yes. So quick question then. Going back over that time, what are you most proud of from a charitable standpoint? Maybe not necessarily what the community foundation has done, but just a situation where, you guys were able to bring something to the table and sometimes you look back that maybe a little unique, maybe something that the general population may not know of what community foundation is doing.
So I will tell you, I mean, Andy, I have so many things I'm proud of, but what I will say, I think a really unique story and something I'm particularly proud of is that we had a fund holder that during his life, he had a small charitable fund here, but after his lifetime, he had a not insignificant estate, let us say that really nobody knew about. that ultimately landed at a charitable fund, a permanent charitable endowment at Bluegrass Community Foundation. And this gentleman lived in Sharpsburg, Kentucky. None of this is private, it's all very public. In Sharpsburg, Kentucky. And he really had one passion, and that was his community of 332 people. And I will say there's going to be an event come early fall. So how that has all played out is we have something called the R.L. Brown Foundation in Sharpsburg, Kentucky. I think it has been up and active about 5 years, and I'm telling you, I am so proud of the work in Sharpsburg. He cared deeply about his community, and they have a little downtown. It might be generous to say it's 2 blocks in length, but there is now a permanent office of the R.L. Brown Foundation. It was a gas station, a auto repair shop that was not in good shape. It has been beautifully renovated. It functions in many ways as a center for community connection. So there are weekly art classes there. Summer camps are run out of there. There are oh my gosh, anything from knitting groups to presentations and community meetings. The space is made available free of charge to nonprofits that want to have meetings. So that is going on. We've renovated a couple of units of homes into affordable houses. There are 4 buildings in downtown Sharpsburg that are under complete historic renovation with tax credits. We have put all new playground equipment into the local little city park there. There is another community center in the town, and we help maintain. I mean, it's not we maintain it, but we make sure that it is maintained and that it is kept in tip-top shape. There is incredible year-round programming in the parks there, and so much more. But I mean, it is just, I really hope and believe that Mr. Brown would be really proud of what his charitable legacy has caused just in 5 years. But this is a perpetual fund. This is just what's happening now. And I will say that my assessment is if you talk to really any resident of Sharpsburg, they are going to tell you that sort of the hope and the optimism and the morale of that community is dramatically different than it was 7 or 10 years ago. It is a little mighty community. There are great people there, but his love and his passion for his community and him making this community the beneficiary of his charitable legacy. And we do things across Bath County, but really focus in on Sharpsburg. It's just making an indelible difference in the lives of so many people. And that's just an example of sort of the creativity that a community foundation can do, because we steward all of that and we make sure that what he wanted to happen, which is that his little community would thrive, that's what we're doing. And there's gonna be a really fun public ribbon cutting of a new tobacco leaf sculpture and a great new sign about the city come this fall, because tobacco farming was part of the genesis of the wealth he went on to create and then left to his community.
I love it. I love it. Well, I agree. I think that what a great story to end on, and just an example of the attention to detail, the creativity, the professionalism, um, let alone to pull that off, the organization and whatnot. It's not an easy lift. So yes. So Lisa, thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate it. I think you are our first podcast like 10 years ago. And now our podcast kind of come and gone, and we're more frequent now. And, with our quarterly newsletter, this past quarter focusing a lot on philanthropic conversations. We just appreciate you being in that, you being on here today, and everything that you do for our clients and for our community. We really appreciate it. So thank you for everything. And if anyone wants to connect with the Bluegrass Community Foundation, talk with us about charitable planning, think about their personal situations, please do not hesitate to reach out. We are always here to help.
Well, Andy, we love working with you and your colleagues and your clients. So please reach out anytime. We're here to help.
Thanks again, Lisa.
Thank you.